Good morning, and thank you for. Good morning and welcome to the press conference here in Beijing, from Beijing, of High Representative Vice President Josep Borrell. He will brief you of his visit here in Beijing, in China, and then he will take a few questions. We will have approximately 45 minutes. Thank you. High Representative, you have the floor.
Good morning to everybody, and thank you. And sorry for being late, but many things are happening in the world today. There are 6 hours difference between Peking and Europe, and I have to take care of other events. Look, finally I am in China. I tried to come twice for one reason or another. The travel has to be postponed. Finally I had the opportunity to come. I am very happy. I had 2 intense days in Shanghai and in Beijing, and I came here with the purpose of holding the strategic dialogue with the Chinese counterpart in order to prepare the next summit between the European Union and China that will take place before the end of the year. There has been other dialogues with some of my colleagues of the European Commission that came here before me in the last weeks. Today, better. Yesterday we had the strategic dialogue on our political approach. And it was mainly focused on 3 issues. First, our bilateral relations. Important to talk to the Chinese counterpart, the Director, Foreign Affairs Council, Minister Wang Yi, that for China and Europe cooperation is very much important, that Europe takes China very, very seriously, and we also expect to be considerate, not through the lens of our relations with others, but in ourselves. Because since the war in Ukraine, Europe has become a geopolitical power. We start being a trade power, after an economic power. Now the war in Ukraine has converted us in a geopolitical power, not just an economic one. And we want to talk with China from this approach. Don't look at European Union relations through the lens of the relations with others. Second message is to tell clearly that for us, Russia represents a huge threat for our security, and that we are committed to support Ukraine facing the Russian invasion, and asking China to take into consideration this very tough position from our side, considering Russia as a security threat to the whole European Union. And second, that we have to rebalance our economic bilateral relations. We have a huge deficit that has increased 60% in the last years. And this should not be the consequences of just a competitive disadvantage between the European Union and China. It must be other structural reasons related with the market access and countered by European firms here in China. And we discuss a lot about the causes and consequences of this huge deficit. knowing that today the export of China towards Europe are at the highest level of the history, and that the technological revolution is changing the partner and the structure of the goods that we exchange. And the conclusion is that despite our differences, there is still a space for cooperation. Yes, we don't have the same political system, it's not a secret. We don't have the same economic system, it's not a secret neither. But despite the differences, we believe that there is still a space for cooperation, and the most important challenges that the world is facing cannot be solved without a strong engagement with China. The first one is climate change. China is burning as much coal as the rest of the world together. In spite of the strong development of renewables on the China energy mix, the increase on coal-powered electricity production in China is offsetting the reduction in the rest of the world. So no way of solving the climate change problem without a strong engagement and partnership with China. We can say the same thing about the level of debt of the emerging countries and the possibility of having a new debt crisis, and the way we have to look at that, because China has become the biggest creditor of the emerging economies. Then we discuss about the regional issues, and obviously we have to focus on the Middle East situation, where the spiral of violence following the attack by Hamas in Israel is threatening the stability of the whole region. And after that, we considered many other regional issues of common interest, ranging from Afghanistan to the crisis in Africa. It's not that we have a shortage of crises to talk about. There are too many, and certainly we didn't exhaust it, all of them. Next week, my political director, Mr. Mora, will come to Pekin and will continue the dialogue on many other regional issues that we couldn't discuss. We talk also about the situation of human rights in general, in some particular cases. But the most important, crucial part of our discussion, apart from the bilateral relations, was obviously the situation in the Middle East. I know that before coming to China, he was in Oman, where I could chair the European Union Gulf Cooperation Council and held an informal Foreign Affairs Council with my colleagues ministers who were in Oman and the others joining by video conference. And we agreed that the international community should do the utmost in order to prevent a further aggravation of the situation that could spill over the region. We reaffirmed the firm condemnation of the indiscriminated attacks by Hamas and called for the stop of violence, any attack against civilians, and the release of hostages. With my China counterpart, we discussed it also, and we certainly agreed that the only long-term solution to this crisis that comes one after the other every 2 or 3 or 4 years is to work on the solution of the two states that we believe, to respect, could survive these tragic events. As I said, we didn't exhaust all crises that we should talk about. Next week, my political director will continue. But it is important to summarize that the three elements of our discussions, our bilateral relations, our trade deficit, and the posture with respect to the war in Ukraine were the most important one. With respect to the war in Ukraine, and insisted to our Chinese counterpart on the need to not support military Russia. Until now, China is not providing arms to Russia, and it's important, and I ask him to help us on avoiding circumvention of sanctions. We discuss about the war in Ukraine long. We know that the position of China, but I make a strong insistence on the fact that seen from the European lenses, the war in Ukraine is not against Ukraine. It's not only affecting Ukraine. It's affecting the security of the Europeans, and it's sending shock waves around the world. And I ask China to use their influence in order to make Russia to go back to the grain deal initiative, in order to make the Ukrainian grain to be able to be exported to the rest of the world. Otherwise, we will face another food crisis. It has been a very interesting discussion. I had also the opportunity of delivering a lecture at the Baida University here in Peking. I thank a lot to the academic authorities for inviting me. And I also had the opportunity to discuss in Shanghai with the Institute for International Relations, where, together with some Chinese scholars, we had an interesting discussion about the role of China in the world and the relationship between China and the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we will take a few questions.
Yeah, that's good, the system of Billboard.
Yeah, we don't have the same in Brussels. I think it works very well. So I will start by Bloomberg.
Thank you, Colin Murphy with Bloomberg. Apologies for not standing. I just wanted to ask a little bit more about the discussions around Israel-Hamas war. You mentioned last night in your remarks as well that you both sides had agreed on the two-state solution aspect of it. But I'm curious, did you press China to use their influence in any other way? For example, reaching out to Iran or Syria or Lebanon? Did you talk about what they could do in concrete measures to sort of de-escalate the situation? So my question basically is, what else besides the two-state Palestinian, two-state solution did you discuss vis-a-vis the Israel-Hamas war?
Well, the two-state solution is not a solution for tomorrow. The two-state solution is not a solution for tomorrow. We are facing critical moments in Gaza. And we cannot say that the problem in Gaza will be solved by the two-state solution, because the two-state solution, the world has been failing miserably. 30 years ago, after Camp David, we haven't succeeded on this two-state solution. But what we discuss with the world, with the Chinese counterpart, is that it is the only solution that can be implemented. So we agreed that we have to work in trying to build on this solution. But this is not a solution for the problem that we are facing today. Today we are facing a great humanitarian, a very dire humanitarian situation in Gaza. And certainly we discussed about the situation there. And as I said yesterday, I agree a lot with the Secretary General of the United Nations when he says that the request by the Israeli army for 1 million people to leave in 24 hours the north of Gaza, the Strip, is something that could not be done. That asking 1 million people moving to the south in 24 hours is just impossible. You cannot move such a volume of people in a short period of time, especially if there is no shelters, neither transportation means. And from this point of view, we consider that this warning is good to know, but they have to give more time in order to make it possible and not to create a tough humanitarian situation.
Can I just follow up real quick? Did you ask them or talk about any other aspects of the Israel-Hamas situation, Israel-Hamas war? For example, did you call on China to use its influence with regional players? Was there any discussion about what China can do more broadly?
Certainly we talk about what each one of us can do in order to try to mend the situation.
Okay, now I will give the floor to AFP.
Hi, thank you, Peter Catterall with AFP. China has criticized the policy of de-risking. They say sometimes that this is just a way to discriminate against European firms in China, or just a way to decouple the relationship as a whole. So how do you define the concept of de-risking, and how did those conversations go with your Chinese counterparts? Thank you.
Well, we discuss a lot about that. But nobody's talking about decoupling. Nobody is considering the possibility or the will of decoupling the European Union economy with the Chinese economy. The amount of our trade relations is so big that decoupling, even if we want it, that we don't want, it's impossible. So forget about decoupling. I explained, I think, deeply that it's a matter of reducing excessive dependencies. And I put the example of what happened when the pandemic came, and in Europe we discovered that we didn't produce a single gram of paracetamol. Not a single gram of paracetamol was produced in Europe, when we have the strongest pharmaceutical industry in the world, because we have offshored all production. So we were 100% dependent on the imports of a product that no one could have imagined that it was a strategic product, paracetamol, until the pandemic came. And then it became a strategic product. And we had to reduce quickly this strong dependency on our imports. And then the war came, and we discovered that we were too much dependent on gas hydrocarbons, in particular in gas. 40% of our imports were gas coming from Russia. Excessive dependencies. And it's a matter of common sense to diversify the sources of supply. Nothing more than that. And by the way, China is doing the same thing. Diversifying the sources of supply is a precautionary measure that any firm and any country has to take. And this will be done in a proportionate manner, analyzing and considering exactly which are the excessive dependencies that has to be reduced, and always in accordance with the international law about trade. So I don't think there is any let's say, conspiracy against our trade relationship. It's a matter of reducing excessive dependencies. And the Commission will launch studies analyzing sector by sector, product by product, where there are excessive dependencies that has to be reduced.
Now we're going to take a question from Kaiji. Yes.
Thank you. Journalist from Tasmania. In Poland and Slovakia, there will be two new governments.
You need to. Can you start again and speak? Yeah, and speak loud.
You put the mic closer. We don't understand.
Yeah. Thank you. In Poland and Slovakia, there will be two new governments. Can we expect any changes in the position of EU on Ukraine?
Well, the position of the European Union is being fixed by the European Union Council and the foreign ministers. So, you know, in Europe, there are changes in government almost every year. Someone is changing government.
Maybe some members of the EU will change their position.
Each government has its own policy, and we try to build a common policy.
Okay, now Efe.
Good morning, Mr. Borrell, colleagues. Lorena Canto from EFE, Spain. Yes, I'm going back to the Israel-Palestine question, if possible.
I understand that it is the crisis that attracts the attention of everybody, even here in Peking. But allow me to say that it was not the only issue that in which we spent a couple of days.
Yes, but my question goes in line with your visit to China. Yes,
yeah.
It's about China too. Yesterday, the Israel government said they were deeply disappointed at China because of its stance at the crisis. They consider that China has not condemned strongly enough the attacks on Israel soil and on the Israel people. They kind of consider that China, like in Ukraine, is being ambiguous. So I would like to know your stance on this issue. Do you think China is being ambiguous, is not condemning strongly enough one of the sides of the conflict? Thank you.
Well, the Chinese minister was with me at the press conference, and he explained himself the Chinese position. And you listened to him, so you know which is the Chinese position. I'm not going to explain you which is the Chinese position. With respect to the war in Ukraine, I insisted that when they talk about territorial integrity, the case of Ukraine is certainly a case of violation of the United Nations Charter and an attack against the territorial integrity of a country. And that's why we both supported Ukraine. I invited them to participate on the peace talks under the auspices of the Zelensky plan. We discussed about a wide range of positions with respect to the war in Ukraine. Nothing new. And you listened to the Chinese minister yesterday asking also for the respect of the principles of international humanitarian law. It is something that we also request. On all the declaration of the foreign affairs ministers, it's clear for us that Israel has the right to defend, but Israel has also to abide by the principles of international humanitarian law.
China Global Television Network.
Thank you. This reporter with CGTN, China Global Television Network. Sorry for that. This reporter with CGTN, and I've got two questions. And the first one is about Chinese state diplomat Wang Yi earlier said, well, the relationship between China and the EU has global strategic significance, should not be dependent on or interfered with by a third party. So what's your take on this? That's my first question. And the second one is about the road. Slowly, no problem.
Okay, so repeat the first one slowly, please.
No problem.
One question is enough.
Je peux parler français?
One question is enough, because you need to leave your colleagues to ask another one.
So this is reporter Yu Yang. I'm with CGTN, and I got two questions. The first one, okay, I got one question, and it's about what Chinese senior diplomat Wang Yi earlier said at the 12th China-EU strategic dialogue. He mentioned that relationship between China and the EU has global strategic significance and should not depend on or be interfered with by a third party. So what's your take on this?
Okay.
Well, I think I start my words today answering your question, because I said clearly that we expect China to stop looking at us through the lens of our relations with others. Stop looking at us through the lenses of our relations with others. It's clear.
So actually the third Belt and I saw reports with follow-up question. So the third Belt and Road Forum for International Cooperation is going to be held right here in Beijing next week. So according to a white paper released by China, well, over the past 10 years.
Look, we said one question is enough. Now it's your turn. Sorry.
Yo quisiera entender la pregunta. Allow me to understand the question, please.
That's so kind of you. I mean, the third Belt and Road Forum for International Cooperation is going to be held right here in Beijing. And according to a white paper released by China, the cumulated imports and exports volume between China and its partners reached over $19 trillion over the past 10 years. So in this regard, what's your thoughts on the Belt and Road Initiative as well as the event? Thank you very much.
Sí. ¿Cuál es la pregunta?
No.
¿Qué es lo que piensas sobre la importancia que ha tenido este foro, según dicen, en el incremento de comercio mundial?
If I understand well, you are asking me about how the Belt and Road Initiative has influenced the trade of China with the rest of the world.
What's your thoughts on the initiative generally? What's your thoughts on the initiative?
Look, this initiative is a 10 years old initiative, and certainly has increased the capacity of building infrastructures around the world. And that's good, because the world needs much more infrastructures. So it's a way for China to develop their influence on the rest of the world. And I don't have any concrete things to say about if it is good or not. China uses this instrument. It's pushing for infrastructure development and investment. We have other instruments. We don't compete with them, but I'm sure that the countries that receive the initiative and the funding of the Belt and Road Initiative are happy with it. It's not to me to judge.
Okay, you now. You've been waiting for I don't know.
Microphone.
Hi, good morning, Mr. Orella. Question from Spanish Daily ABC. I imagine that global circumstances had been different. One of the main issues that your visit you were going to discuss was the investigation on the Chinese subsidies on electric vehicles. So I wonder, in your interactions with Chinese authorities these days, if you touched upon this topic, and from what you gathered, what the reaction will be. Thank you.
Well, when we talk about our economic relations, we talk about the level of deficit. And when we talk about the level of deficit, you enter into considering which are the elements of the trade that could create this deficit. But I am not the trade commissioner. The trade commissioner has been in Beijing some days ago, and they spent 2 days analyzing deeply what is happening with all kinds of products that we sell and we buy, and why this trade deficit has been increasing. So I didn't go deeply to this issue because I am not the trade commissioner, and we have a lot of geopolitical issues to consider. But certainly this was discussed, it was mentioned, and I told to my Chinese counterpart that to launch an investigation is just to launch an investigation. Let's see the result of the investigation.
And then the Irish Times.
Thank you, Dennis Staunton from the Irish Times. During your visit, Dennis Staunton from the Irish Times. Thank you. I'm sorry. During your visit, you spoke about the responsibility that China has to use its influence on Russia, where the Ukraine war is concerned. Yesterday, after Israel issued its instruction to more than 1 million people in Gaza to leave their homes within 24 hours, Ursula von der Leyen was in Jerusalem, where she met Prime Minister Netanyahu, and she gave him the unconditional support of the European Union in his response to last week's attacks by Hamas. And she made no public criticism of that evacuation order. By what authority does the Commission President speak for the European Union on this matter? And after what she said and did in Israel yesterday, how much responsibility will the European Union now share for what Israel does next?
Look, the position of the European Union on foreign policy is being determined by the European Union Council and by the Foreign Affairs Ministers' Council. Because the common foreign policy of the European Union is an intergovernmental policy. It's not a community policy. So, the official position of the European Union with any foreign policy is being fixed, I repeat, by the guidelines, the high-level political decision of the European Union Council, chaired by President Michel, and by the Foreign Affairs Council ministers, chaired by me. And the position is clear, is that we certainly defend the right of Israel to defend itself against the attack that has been suffering, but as any right, it has a limit. And this limit is international law and international humanitarian law. And that's what we said in Oman, the ministers, and that's what I've been repeating since then. The right of defense to Israel has to be in accordance with international humanitarian law. And about this warning of 1 million people leaving Gaza in the north of Gaza in 24 hours, I said, and I'm saying that representing the official position of the European Union, is that is utterly impossible to implement. And I am supporting clearly the position of the United Nations Secretary General, saying that to imagine that you could move 1 million people in 24 hours in a situation like Gaza can only be a big humanitarian crisis.
So who's she speaking for?
Thank you very much.
I think I've been quite clear.
Thank you very much. This is the end of this press conference. Thank you.
Thank you.